So just before we begin, we want to acknowledge that we are gathering here in the territory of 1877 Treaty 7 signatories, comprised of the Iahe Nakota, including Chiniki, Goodstoney, and Bearpaw nations, the Blackfoot Confederacy, including the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai Nation, Tsuut'ina Nation, and the home to the Rocky View Métis District 4 within the Battle River Territory. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it to my colleague here, Nick, who many of you probably know from the Biosphere and WildSmart program.
Thank you, Tanya.
Yeah.
So for those that don't know me, my name is Nick Derek. I'm the WildSmart program director at the Biosphere Institute, and I get the privilege of working with some amazing fellow staff and volunteers, and I'm talking our volunteer wildlife ambassadors, and I see a few in the room, and Derek is one of our wildlife ambassadors. And Derek Ryder, I think, is about 13 years now. He's been the wildlife ambassador. He wears many hats, as you'll find out, and volunteers for many different groups. And I'm quite confident that he volunteers more hours full time. So he's busier. So much for retirement is what I'm saying. But I'm not going to talk too much about Derek because you'll find out a lot about him throughout this presentation. But he does a lot of really great things. He's a very, very knowledgeable person. I had the privilege of doing a ride along with him this summer to do some bear monitoring. It was really awesome. And he taught me a lot about where we live, which was really, really cool. This presentation is really well set up. And I would like to ask everyone to please remember your questions for after Derek's done. It'll be about 35-40 minutes or so. We'll have lots of time for discussion and questions. I mean, questions and discussion, but I don't want to interrupt Derek, and he's got a really good flow. So let's hold your questions until he's done, and then we'll have a really, really great discussion. So without further ado, Derek, right.
It is great to see a bunch of other wildlife ambassadors in the room. As Nick mentioned, I've been a wildlife ambassador for a long time. And what we do as wildlife ambassadors, in case you don't know, is we go to trailheads and we teach people how to deal with wildlife in the wilderness. One of the other hats that I wear, as Nick mentioned, I wear a lot of hats. I just actually came from a Friends of Kananaskis event, which is why my logo is being hidden. I'm a director there. One of the other things I do is I'm a member of the Alberta Parks Kananaskis Bear Team, and I cannot stress enough, I am not a spokesperson for Alberta. The reason I mention this is because I'm going to bring into this conversation some of the experiences we have on the bear team, managing bears both in various and sundry places and environments. So I'm not talking about Alberta Parks policy. I'm not a spokesman for Alberta Parks. Just want to make that abundant. We have urban wildlife, and shouldn't be the slightest bit surprising that we have urban wildlife. My house is in that photograph. I live in Harvey Heights, and a lot of my conversation today is going to be about Harvey Heights and hamlets, but everything is much applicable to Canmore as well, because what you see there is my house is in this big giant forest. And this big giant forest, it's kind of not surprising that we have urban wildlife, because where does the wilderness start and urban begin becomes the question. In addition to that, there are invisible lines. You can't see them, but I'll put them on for you. That's the boundary there. So this is Banff National Park up here. And over on this side, this is Bow Valley Wildland Park. And this piece in here is part of the MD of Bighorn. And I'm in that little block. And not only when we look at a macro scale, are we in where we live, surrounded by wilderness and therefore semi-transparent, when you get even closer, it's actually a little bit worse. Our space truly is almost transparent to wildlife. Green spaces in my hamlet, which I'm going to highlight here, you can't tell the difference by being on which side of the road as to whether you're in the wilderness or in my hamlet. These green spaces look just like wilderness to animals that are around here. And again, this is my hamlet. And this same is true for Lac des Arcs, it's true for Dead Man's Flats, it's true for Canmore. We have these wilderness spaces, like, for example, Policeman's Creek, that come into town. We have horses and various things that bring us in, where they provide basic transit corridors where wildlife is, and wildlife can't understand the differences between wilderness and the urban. And so it's not the slightest bit surprising that we get wildlife. And I'm going to tell you that all but one photograph in this entire presentation are on my front lawn. So we've got deer and we've got coyotes and we've got elk, and we've got small things that like that, as snowshoe martins. But the only thing I haven't caught on my front yard camera is cats. However, there have been cougar sightings within my hamlet. They've just never been on my front yard. And this is not unusual in Canmore either. If you look at the actual, we have backtracking information that we share as wildlife ambassadors, where the ecology teams have backtracked cougars, and you look and they're all over places within Canmore. They just wander around, and again, so it should not be the slightest bit surprising that they walk around my hood or your hood, and they do. And of course, we get a lot of bear visitors, and most of what I'm going to talk about tonight is about bears, but in reality, everything else is just as applicable to every other piece of wildlife that shows up on your street. But my focus is going to be on bears. And the way I'm going to talk about them is I'm going to tell you two stories. First is the story of 136, and the second is the story which I call the dynamic duo. 136, let's talk 136. He's the second baddest bear next to the boss. This is 136, in case you haven't met him, also known as Split Lip. This is that's Steve Michelle up there from Banff National Park. 2 weeks before the story I'm going to tell, this happened. He was recollared in the Sunshine Village parking lot. That's 136. And my story actually starts 18 hours before he shows up on my street. And my story starts here, just to tell you where we're looking. You can see the town of Canmore over here. There's the gap. We've got Goat Pond here. We've got Spray Dam here, Spray West Campground here. We've got Goat Creek here. I'd like to thank Sandy Norris from Parks Canada, who gave me this data. This happened a couple of years ago, and I have the GPS location around this particular incident. So I've got a good handle on it. And so T-minus 18 hours, 136 was actually in Spray West Campground. And then each squares and numbers is a 2-hour window. So there are 2-hour intervals on our GPS data for this particular bear. Over the next couple of hours, moved over there. By 5 p.m. was transiting Eeyore, then headed up the valley towards Banff. By 9 p.m. had made it to Banff, crossed through their wildlife corridor, which is in this kind of air space in here, which is where wildlife transit. His photograph is at 5:05 p.m. taken from my living room window. There's one set, that's 136 on my street. And you can tell that's 134. There's the number tag. And what's he doing? Having lunch. It's what bears do. They eat. And so up on my front lawn, having a bear in the urban environment isn't a great strategy. And at the time, we were regularly seeing tourists coming up and wandering through our hamlet with dogs on leash and off leash, with kids on bikes 2 doors down from me. In this photograph was a couple of kids, 6 and 7 year olds that like to ride their bikes up and down the street. So we, of course, do what you're supposed to do when things like this happen. We call Canada. We saw the bear, and the Fish and Wildlife officer showed up in about 30 minutes. It was Dave Dixon. I know Dave well because I used to work with Dave Dixon when he was in the neighborhood. And the bear was still eating dandelions right there when Dave showed up. Except that I kind of lost sight of 136. And so Dave pulled up in front of my driveway, and I walked down and I said, "I don't know where the bear is, Dave." And Dave said, "I know where the bear is, right there." And I looked through his passenger window, and no word of a lie. In my green space, in the wilderness space in my hamlet, and invisible to me right across the road. And so you end up in these circumstances when you have urban wildlife, is you get into circumstances where you start to get into a risk of very, very high risk situations. Anybody walking down the street would know what's going on. So just for reference, if you go to the left in this photograph, you walk deeper into my hamlet. If you go to the right, in about 50 meters is the wilderness, is the Bow Valley Wildland Park. So Dave did what we would do. On the bear team, and several of my bear team folks are in the room, and they will attest that this is what we do. So Dave went to over on towards the hamlet side, came in and did, and we all have a bear voice. Yo, bear, get out of here! Right, that commanding voice that we use. He set off one screamer. It was very, very interesting watching 136. 136 looked up and if he could speak English would have said, damn. At bear pace, right towards the wilderness. So this is very typical reaction. Bears respond to noise. We deal with this every day. Bears move at bear pace. That's what we're trying to do. And Dave did a fantastic job of moving that bear very gently out of the hamlet. It walked out of my green spares and into the wildland park. And that's basically the end of the story. But I do want to talk about the aftermath. What was the aftermath of this? Well, 136 kind of hung around outside the hamlet for a couple of hours. One other neighbor of mine saw him cross the road. Dave Dixon, the Fish and Wildlife officer, stuck around for a short while and basically made sure that he didn't stay inside the hamlet. Basically pushed him out one more time by saying, "Hey, bear, get out of here!" And he moved outside and hung around for a little while in the wildland park space around my hamlet, and then left and headed off in that direction. By 9 p.m. that was the last one, and by the next one, which is 11 p.m., they're way past Cat Creek, working his way towards Banff, hung around in that kind of space for a little ways, and then continued trucking, and then finally had a nap. This is kind of typical behavior. I do look at our GPS data from our bears. It's part of my job. And I will tell you that this is very common for our collared bears all season long. This bear was awake for 70 plus hours before actually going to nap. And this is normal. This is what happens when you get our bears. Bears, I don't know, we tell you all sorts of things about bears. The data that I see, bears aren't nocturnal, bears aren't diurnal, bears aren't crepuscular. They're eating machines that eat until they fall asleep and then they wake up and do it again. And so that's kind of cool. And in the end, headed off towards Johnson Lake and off the picture. So what can we take away from 136's story? A couple of things. The first thing is that wildlife can be very long ranging. Needless to say, look how much ground 136 covered in under 36 hours. But more importantly, from a perspective of dealing with wildlife, 136 was very responsive to what I call an invitation to leave. It was very, very obvious that to me that 136 had been dealt with in the past, which he had been. He'd been recollared a couple of times. He'd been dealt with by the Parks Canada staff, and all it took was get out of here, bear, and a noisemaker, and they were gone. That's a lot of our bears are like that. Not all of them by any stretch, but we have a lot of bears that are quite responsive and I'm not going to say well trained. I'll get into that in a minute, but they're very they understand. And my point in that is that bears learn, and I'm going to talk way more about that. But the other message in this is, how can this poor 136 tell the difference between the wilderness where he belongs and the urban where he's not really that good? Because he just travels around in these massive spaces and just tries to make do and find the next set of dandelions. And so when you get into this, how do you tell the wilderness from the urban? You get into the messaging question. And I'm a wildlife ambassador. There's other wildlife ambassadors here. I can teach you how to be a wildlife ambassador very quickly. It's pretty easy. This is the messaging. It's official. We're taught it. It's very good. When we meet you at a trailhead, we try to convince you that you're about to go for a walk in the bear's home. You want to be a respectful visitor in that bear's home. We tell you to make noise, to knock before you enter, because that's a respectful thing to do when you visit a bear's home. And And we tell you to stop, talk, and walk when you run into a bear. Stop. What's the bear doing? We tell you to talk to it. ID yourself as a people. Back away, give it room, because it's their house, not your house. And we tell you, we try to let the wildlife be. And we actively discourage you from using noisemakers like screamers or bangers or air horns or other options, because that's not really being terribly respectful. Those are designed to push wildlife away. That's like going into somebody's house, into their kitchen, and saying, get out of here, get out of your kitchen, get out of your living room. And so we don't want you doing that. Compare that to the urban environment. There is no sanctioned messaging for the urban environment. It doesn't exist, which is a bit problematic, because as a wildlife ambassador, I go to places like the Engine Bridge, and on one end of the Engine Bridge is the wilderness, because it's Bow Valley Wildland Park, and on the other end of the Engine Bridge, it's not, it's the town of Canmore, and I don't have any sanctioned messaging to tell people what to do when a bear is sitting on your front yard in Canmore, which is why we're here to talk tonight about that exact problem. If you ask me, and now that we're talking about my opinion and not any sanctioned anything, this is now our home. It's not their home. We live here, not them. We don't want bears in our urban spaces to feel welcome or comfortable, because they stay. And so the question becomes, how can we safely make them uncomfortable and want them to leave while considering our neighbors? So when I say that, I'm now going to relate what we do in the bear team. When the bear team discourages wildlife, mostly bears, from being somewhere that they're not welcome, like a campground or a day use area, boy, there's a lot of considerations you have to do this. You have to consider where the bear wants to go, why they're here in the first place, why they're in that day use area, why they're in that campground in the first place. You can't push bears into people. It's no good to come up to a bear in a campground and say, move, and the bear moves deeper into the campground, because that just makes the problem worse. You can't push them into a worse place, and there's lots of ways that you can do that. We can't push them where a bear doesn't want to go. It's really difficult to push a bear off a really good food source. In often cases, if it's just plant material, maybe, but if it's a carcass, the only option really is for move them off far enough that we can move the carcass. Not me, I don't do that, but there are people who are really good at it that do. And the other thing is, you really try to do any of this alone. Rarely do we want, am I encouraged, do I hear anybody in the bear team attempting to do any of this on their own if they don't have to. If you're in a campground and you need to move a bear that way, the reality is you need people on either side making sure the bear kind of moves that way. And you need somebody up front saying, hey people, we're gonna move a bear through here. There's a bear coming, can I get you to move inside your car and tent? Those considerations are really, really tough in the wilderness with professionals. And they're really, really tougher in the urban environment with professionals. And they're super challenging for some people who just have a bear on the street and a piece of grass. And so this is the challenge we face, is the right way, the proven actions that we know work. It's tough to figure out what to do about them, which is part of the reason we don't have messaging. But there are things individuals can do. And so when you get into the circumstance like this, that's my house on the left. When you get into circumstances like this, you're not, I don't believe, powerless. There are things we can do. And to kind of explore what it could look like and what it looks like if you don't do anything, I want to talk about the story of the dynamic duo. I never did get a photograph of both of these bears on my front lawn, but there's mom and a cinnamon cub. These photographs were taken on my front yard camera in 24 September 2021. So this pair of bears showed up into our hamlet in September 2021 at night. They started off coming in at night. First times I caught them on my cameras was at night. And for the next 2 weeks or so, between late September and early October, they were seen by many, many people in the hamlet wandering around. They moved to daytime. They were spending time in people's yards. They were caught on front door cameras. They were seen by lots of people. Initially, they were seen very sporadically, once every 3 days. Then suddenly it was every second day, and then it was every day, and then it was multiple times a day as they got more and more comfortable. So what was the community reaction when this happened? This is October the 13th, 2021. Just had a major run-in with baby cub and mom bear. The baby cub was in my fenced backyard and was trapped, eventually climbing the woodpile, and was gone with mom bear making a lot of noise. They were spooked by my dog, urban environment full of dogs. We could both have been in a lot of trouble, extremely close call. Lucky mom was on the other side of the fence. Be careful out there. She's getting very game and too close for comfort. And I'm not sure who to report this to at this time. October the 14th, heads up folks. These bears seem to be hanging around the hood for more than it's their home habitat. I suspect they're getting rewarded. Might be ornamental crab trees, mountain ashberries, birdseed, dog food, pumpkins soon, but something's keeping them at hand. That's a true statement. Be vigilant and let them head for their dens sooner rather than later. And then on October the 15th, Bree the black mom and her cub, please don't report these bears to K Country, as they will likely relocate them into another bear's territory where their chances of survival are minimal. So bad things are already happening. Bears haven't even been in the hamlet for more than 2 weeks, and already you've got small conflict issues going on in people's backyards. They're staying too long, and people are wondering why. There's questions about the reporting. Nobody's really sure what they should be doing about it. I tell you, I get a bear report as part of my team. I get the internal bear report. Nobody's going to see that. And I know that what gets reported, and these bears never, ever, ever showed up on that bear report, except when I reported them because they were on my lawn. And then they disappeared. Yay team. Escaped the bullet, or did we? May 22nd, on 2002, they were back. Just a note to let you know that I saw approximately 2:15 p.m. beautiful black bear with a cinnamon colored cub on the ridge overlooking the road by the branch tree compost bins. Pretty close. She got her cub up a tree, which is very normal behavior. And they took a good look at us, all good. That's a photograph of mom crossing my front lawn, taken on on May the 26th. I didn't include the baby because all I got was the top of her back, or its back. So they started to come back. And in June, they became regulars. And when I say regulars, that's them at a bird feeding station in my hamlet. One neighbor, not far from me, had a crabapple tree, which is now gone. They'd cut it down. And the bears actually tried to climb the crabapple tree, had troubles, and then spent about an hour and figured out how to climb up onto her roof in order to get at the crabapples in the tree. Attractants bad. And then they got company. This is a different bear entirely. There's mom and the kid. There's this shaggy male that has now shown up on the 10th of June. That's 6 days later. And this male showed up. And what happened? Mom got a boyfriend. And so what she did was she hung out with the male and left this 2-year-old cub alone in my hamlet to fend for itself. She hung out with her boyfriend in and around the hamlet for at least 2 to 3 weeks. And lest you think this is unusual, this is actually pretty typical behavior for bears to dump their kids. This year, tell you a story from this year. 104 left her 2 2-year-olds and went on a date. This is not the first time she's done this. Her daughter 139 did it too. We never know why they do this. There's some smarter people in the room than I that suggest maybe that it's a way for mom to help the cubs survive and avoid that big male that could kill them. So we hope they reunite. But they didn't. In this particular case, 104 didn't reunite with her kids. One of her cubs was killed by another grizzly bear. The other one just disappeared on us. Don't know what happened to him. These abandoned underagers are very difficult for us to manage in the bear world, and a nightmare in this scenario. They take a lot of time. They're not really well educated by mom about what's good and what's not, and what's safe and where you should be and where you can't be, and where to get food and how to manage. But this little bear decided that it was very safe to hang around in my hamlet. And so what ends up happening is that on the bear team, when this happens to us, we end up being surrogate parents. Gosh, we spent an enormous amount of time with 104's kids this summer. And we stewarded those cubs out of campgrounds and day use areas, and we managed them roadside. So there's us to try and do that. There's nobody to do that to this bear. So this bear hung out in our hood for a while. That's a terrible photograph through my back window, but there's the bear climbing along my fence, exiting the property. This happened on June 27th. We were Karen, my partner and I were out on our front deck having lunch, or dinner, and mom and the boyfriend showed up. That's the boyfriend. We yelled at him, "Hey bear," all that type of stuff that you're supposed to do. This is the male's reaction. The goal of aversion, and I get taught by this gentleman in the back endlessly, is to try and convince the bear that you're the bigger, badder bear when you're trying to move them. That's clearly not working here. That bear is not in the slightest bit interested in rejecting me telling him to get away. That bear, that's, yeah. I should explain the bear's ear tag, by the way. There's nothing wrong with that bear. This bear was part of a Banff research study about the electrification of the fence between the Cascade Power Plant kind of area. They did a couple year study where they had bears monitoring bears, see whether or not the electric fence was working. This bear had been tracked a couple of years ago by the National Park staff. His home range is the Bear Home Bench. That's where he lives. They have lots of data on it on the radio collar. So, and the Bear Home Bench is like 50 meters to the right in this photograph. So it's not the slightest bit surprising that that bear would be in my neighborhood. But here's a bear who absolutely has got no interest whatsoever in leaving because I'm telling him to leave. June 29th, that's a photograph taken from my front window of a bear attempting to nap in my tree. That's that same little guy. What happened on this particular thing, he showed up in my yard and, "Hey bear," Karen was doing this all by her lonesome because I was out. "Hey bear, get out of here." And what the bear did? Climb the tree. It's not unusual behavior for black bears, not in the slightest. In fact, when the bear team is trying to manage black bears that are in the golf course or in places they don't belong, and they need to be moved off, the first thing they do is run up a tree. That's what black bears do. And tree climbing is easy. They feel safe up there. But a bear napping on a tree in your front yard is very bad. That's very bad. So we called dispatch. And the nearest Fish and Wildlife officer was in Okotoks. We don't have a Fish and Wildlife officer here anymore. All of our Fish and Wildlife officers here is dispatch out of either Concord or Okotoks, and they're over an hour away. And he said it would be at least an hour to two before he could respond to this. So what were we told? Keep making noise. Don't let that bear nap. Eventually it would say, "This is not comfortable." It'll come down out of the tree, make a ton of noise, and discourage it from being on the property, which is what Karen did. And it scooted off the property. But where it went is I don't know, or we don't know. And remember, that side of me, and the other side of the wild, that's where people live. So I'm pushing a bear off my property, but is it making the situation any better for anybody? It went down the street. What was the community reaction to this? It's been going on for May and June and into July. June 22nd, back alley bears are bad news. Whenever it's safe to do so, we should be making noise and trying carefully to deter bears from hanging out in a residential area. It may seem really cool to have a bear in your backyard, but trust me, this is a recipe for disaster if someone surprises them or get into garbage or other attractants or become food conditioned. June 28th, just saw some pics and videos from a friend of mine taken yesterday of that ear-tagged male black bear and his girlfriend getting into someone's bird feeding station. Attractants bad. August 24th, chunky, very black bear heading northwest up Rundle Road towards the quarry entrance, wandered into my yard, blasted with an air horn. There's an interesting concept. Decided to leave pretty quickly, followed a few minutes later by her cinnamon young of last year, also air horned. also ran away towards the quarry entrance. Kananaskis dispatch notified. So if you compare this reaction to the reaction in 2021, you get a very, very different community response going on now. The messaging here is pretty good. There's a recognition that deterring them is good, but how is the question? That's the big how. The bears got reported to dispatch. The actions that were taken were good, attractants bad. What's the aftermath of this story? Well, this wasn't a good aftermath. On August the 29th, that bear was bedded down under a tree in a backyard next to Sauvage and Paintbox Lodge on 10th Street, smack downtown Canmore. And Fish and Wildlife relocated it. At one point, one of the bears was on the roof of the dilapidated house. I wonder where he learned to climb roofs. Now, a lot of people say, well, you got circumstances like this, what do? There is actually a provincial protocol. It really does exist. It's called the Black Bear Response Guide. There's a response guide for cougars. There's a response guide for elk. There's a response guide for coyotes. There's a response guide for wolves. There's all these response guides. It's a standard protocol, and it says what to do. Preventative action will be the initial response before the decision is made to capture. It says so right in the protocol right there. I know this protocol. I've got to know it for what I do. And prevention is part of that protocol. This is actually part of the protocol. And you can take a look at what the protocol says. Preventative actions are often the appropriate first response. But by the time Fish and Wildlife got involved in this particular incident, they were so down the list of what the first response could have been, they were 18 months late. Because how did this happen? The reality is, or the question I ask is, did the tolerance that we had in my hamlet for a pair of bears hanging around in 2021 lead to them coming back and being even more complacent and being even happier in 2022, lead them to say, well, if this place is good, then Canmore's fine too, and therefore I'll just go in there. Bears learn. We have tons of data. Don't have to believe me. Go read a bunch of papers on aversive conditioning successes in Kananaskis. It works. Bears learn. We can teach them. The trick is that inactions matter just as much as actions. And everything we don't do matters just as much as things we do. Doing nothing says whatever they're doing is okay. But it's a challenge. You know, we work very hard to make these our messaging to bears consistent, and it does work. But how do you get people in an urban environment to do that and be consistent? It's challenging to do in the wilderness. It's challenging to do for the bear team. It takes a whole crew to do, all of whom are very good and very capable. And we still struggle with weekenders and visitors who don't really know what's going on, and you see pictures of them trying to get too close to an elk or do whatever they're doing. Letting bears occupy the urban environment is not a way to ensure they're going to stay on the landscape. Bears don't die or get relocated because something goes wrong. How did a bear come to believe that being in downtown Canmore was okay? I would argue very quickly that we let them. We taught them. We taught them by inaction in my hamlet that being anywhere in an urban environment was fine. There was no prevention at the hamlet level at all throughout this entire 18-month story of the dynamic duo. There was even a reluctance to start prevention. Don't call dispatch, they'll be relocated. So instead of doing action, we're preventing action. And as I say, every action we take or inaction is additive. Wandering through is fine, then finding natural food is okay, then finding shelter and safety, which those bears obviously did, is great. Then finding food at a reason to stay is great, and then you end up in conflict situation. And everything I just said is equally as true for every other critter that is on your front lawn. The outcomes may be different, but a herd of elk on my front lawn is not going to be great long-term for me or the elk. And so but the question is, what do we do about them? there's lots of cool stuff that's written about all of this stuff. My absolute favorite, it's tiny font, is from the livingwithbears.com. It's the bear behavioral ladder of progression. Start, you smell something, you're a bear, you smell something interesting, you follow your nose to people, places, your food smells good, but people might be dangerous, wait until dark to explore. My bears started, and or all of the bears that come into my hamlet start invariably in the dark. They get bird seed and they do something and then they disappear and magically they come back and the bird seed's still there. Attractant's bad. He repeats over and over again. They keep coming back. They follow the nose back and then they get a jackpot. Because I do work in my yard and have my garage door open and there's stuff in my garage that a bear would want. Great story we tell as wildlife ambassadors in Peaks of Grassy a couple of years ago. There was a bear that did exactly this. Came in, started coming in the dark hours, then showed up during daylight hours. Was started off eating natural food, ended up breaking into having some nice unnatural food because petunias taste good. And then one gentleman just happened to leave his garage door open while he was doing some work in his yard, and the bear got into the garage. And now you got him in the garbage, and now you got him in problem. You explore the neighborhood. You get much fatter than you can foraging in the woods. You start coming during the day since the food supply is endless, because it is. You find open garbage, you knock something open, you do enough damage now to get reported. It was the bear in the garage in the Peaks of Grassy that got the bear reported. And now you start approaching people, you get tagged, and you get ear tagged and hauled away. That bear was ear tagged and hauled away, sent out to the far ends of the ghost. Find your way back. That bear that was hauled out to the ghost from Peaks of Grassy came back within 72 hours, was at the front, made it from way over 125 kilometers away as crow flies, made it back. Find your way back, yay, pick up where you left off, scare somebody, put out the trash, get labeled a threat, and get killed before your time. And you just saw it in action for the dynamic duo. So the question is, if there's no official messaging on what to do with urban wildlife, what I want to talk about and actually time for conversation, when you look at this ladder, how should we be dealing with these guys? We've got bears coming in, and they're going to come in because we're attached. And unless we fence everything, and even then, you know, bears are pretty good at climbing fences, and then how do we manage that? But what should we be doing with urban wildlife? Because I'm going to tell you, standing here, there is no message. I can't tell you what to do. I can tell you what I think, but I can't tell you what to do. So I'd like Nick to play moderator to add and have a conversation about this. What should we be doing with urban wildlife? What's the right answer for having a bear on your street?
Anyone? I will also say for those joining in on Zoom, Tanya will be able to read out, or I can come read them if you want, but I can participate as well. Ask your questions on the chat if you're on Zoom there.
And we have 35 people on Zoom. Just
35, okay.
Yeah.
Ooh, awesome. Great. Does anybody have any comments or wanna start this one off? We need a minute or two to let things sink in. How does the room feel about reporting wildlife?
Absolutely.
Yeah? Everyone here feels pretty confident that they would report wildlife? You see what happens if you don't report wildlife, what can happen?
I'll actually argue that not reporting the wildlife created the situation that in the end resulted in them being moved out. Because if you don't report it at the beginning, when prevention is possible, by the time you're reporting them, it's too late.
If you do report to them, the closest Fish and Wildlife responder is in, Timbuktu somewhere, who's gonna respond?
So the answer to that's a couple of different things. So you heard in this particular story, they're gonna give you advice about what to do. So that's great. They're gonna tell you what to do. But the other thing is, and I can't stress this enough, I mentioned I get the bear report. And I know what's on that bear report, and I know what gets seen. I also know who sees that bear report. I know the people who know what to do see it. And I know they pay attention to it. And they may choose, because they're smart people, way smarter people than me, to not do anything yet. But putting it on their radar matters. At some point in time, they start going, yeah, this is not a great idea. And maybe we should start putting up fair warning signs. Or maybe we should start not having the nearest fish and wildlife officer this week, an hour and a half away. And I've seen that in real life too. It's like there's a couple of bears in town, so the fish and wildlife officer is gonna spend their time here, and now they're closer so they can respond.
You've been talking primarily about bears. There have been a herd of 15, 20 elk around town the last 3 days.
Yep.
Who do we report them to and what would they do about them anyway?
So that's an interesting question. That's part of the reason I think there's no urban messaging, because nobody knows what the right answer to that is. I personally think they should be reported, but I think the biggest issue is how do you move a set of elk out of town? I would argue by the time you're to the point of moving them out of town, you're already 2/3 of the way down the ladder. They're already comfortable. You should have got them earlier. You can start trying to make them uncomfortable now. Question is how to do that and who should do it. I don't have answers to that. I can tell you that you're not powerless, but I can tell you that I don't know who should be doing it.
Well, the best patches of grass right now is right at Millennium Park because there's nice big grassy fields and they love it there.
And Millennium Park is connected to a habitat path. So literally you cross the road and they're where they're supposed to be. And so how do you get that? That's why I think the fencing of that was so critical in town.
I mean, I think the town is doing quite a good job now when it comes down to the attractants, like, the crabapple trees and the mountain ash and those kind of things. They're getting a lot more free with the ticketing and people are chopping down the trees and things like that. But then again, grass is harder, right? Because I mean, the school grounds and everything else. I mean, do we put up fences around those like what we did with Centennial Park? But I mean, the big patches of grass, I mean, not as attractive for bears, but certainly for deer and elk.
I can tell you categorically, I've got photographs of bears eating my front lawn, just my grass, not even my dandelions. I mean, I'm religious about pulling my dandelion heads 200 or so a day because I got a lot of dandelions, but they just eat my grass. And the thing is that what I'm trying to do personally on my lawn is make it so that, yeah, it's as natural as it can. No natural, as few natural attractants as I can have. So I cut down on my berry bushes, which want to grow like weeds. But I got rid of those. But at the same point in time, I can't turn myself to zero unless I put nothing but rock everywhere. And that's impractical for a whole lot of reasons. I have a septic tank. So realistically speaking, we can't eliminate all these attractants, but what we can do is make it so that the wilderness is actually nicer from an attractive perspective.
This is all really helpful for me. So I live in Three Sisters and I cycle as much as I can. And early in the season, in the spring, summer, there was very obvious the bear scat right on the table, on the trail. It was almost steaming. It was that recent. So when I got home, I emailed the town. Last year probably got a copy on that because the town responded and said they'd let people know. But I was told that trail was outside the jurisdiction. This is just out of Three Sisters of the town. It was provincial jurisdiction. I copied that email to the owner of where I bought my bike. That does mostly rental business. And I said, hey, tourists have to be educated. And it was really distressing because for many of us, if there is a creature put down because we have been, call it what you will, no, that can't happen for our learning. So I felt very incomplete with that whole process because we've got businesses in town that are looking for profit that are not recognizing that we are increasing as that trail is paved. We are increasing the probability of wildlife human interactions on it. And we don't have people educated, we don't have people knowing how to respond, we don't have people respectful.
Especially because the other side of the river there is the wildland part of the actually Nordic Center Park and then the wildland park. jurisdictionally, you talk jurisdictional issues, and I think jurisdictional issues is a big issue. When I showed you the invisible lines on the lot, that's 3 different jurisdictions crossing that little tiny space. And what happens in my hamlet, and what happens outside my hamlet, and what happens outside of the yellow line are 3 different things from 3 different agencies, and it becomes a challenge. Kananaskis Dispatch is fantastic at acting as triage and sending it to the right people. So I always recommend around here, Kananaskis Dispatch. They'll even do it and then get BAMF involved if there's something going on that side. So they're great. So that's my answer is always I'll call them. There's no official messaging. I can't tell you the right thing to do. This is part of the problem.
Guys, I just want to add that as well. So this is why we also have wildlife ambassadors going by the engine bridge, going on the trails to educate. You could put 1 million signs up. You can't make people read signs. And there is also a lot of finger pointing to tourists. But what you described, from what I see a lot of the time, and from what the ambassadors see, a lot of those people going in closed areas, you know, having their dog off leash, that's not visitors, that's locals. That's the entitled local that we unfortunately have here in town. I've been living for 30 years. I walk my dog on leash. My dog has never chased a bear. I've been living for 30 years. There's never been a bear in my fruit tree. But it only has to happen once to get in your fruit tree, and then that bear might get relocated and killed. So absolutely, education is key, but there are some people that have received a lot of education and just won't change their behavior. And unfortunately, sometimes it takes a very bad situation, a person dying, a child dying, or a famous bear, you know, getting relocated or killed for people to change their mind. Absolutely, can there be more education? For sure. But there needs to also be enforcement and an actual change in culture and change in behavior, which has to start from within. And we need to lead by example. And right now, as a community, not everyone is on board and doing the right thing to lead by example, because there's still a lot of finger pointing.
I was trying to do that by engaging conversation, and the reason I copied the email to the person I know, because the bikes were signed. And when I stopped some renters of bikes, and I asked, by the way, were you taught about bear spray, how to recognize scat, what to do if you see a bear? They said no. That's when I sent the email. I thought, no, we're missing some really important things in this. No,
Absolutely.
I agree.
And there are definitely, you know, every year I get local businesses that call me up and say, can you come do some bear spray training with my staff so we can educate our customers? And we do that, but certainly not all the businesses in town do that. Yeah.
You got something on the,
Yeah, I've got
chat?
something on the chat here, and I think this relates really well to what we're talking about right now. So Chuck B is saying, education is not working on this issue. Can more bylaws regarding food attractants should be enforced more strictly? Enforcement is too nice.
Yeah, so that gets into the carrot stick. You need both is reality. There's a reason wildlife ambassadors have a role and make the impact that we make. I just wish I knew what to say to people in the urban environment. But you also need the enforcement side as well. And then you get this issue with jurisdictional issues on top of that, where I could take you for a walk, and I just actually did a class on this a couple of weeks ago, where I took somebody on a less than 40-minute walk and crossed 6 different jurisdictional boundaries in 40 minutes over in the Horseshoe Loop area, which is easy to do. And so I don't disagree. I think you need both, but you've got, as Nick just mentioned, I think there's the early 2021 community reaction was illustrative of the challenges that you face of, I don't know who to call, and I'm not gonna call them. And if it starts there, then at least the enforcement guys can know. As I say, if it shows up enough on the bear report, I'm gonna tell you the managers who look at that, who are authorized to do things, AKA not me, actually go and do things. They really do take action. And their attention gets up. You don't put it on the report, it's not on the radar, period. And these bears never were on the radar.
So what's the process for getting, like, how do we get this messaging, like an official message, right? Like, because there's one thing coming to consensus as a community, which is hard enough, but that consensus then someone has to take ownership of that, for that to actually become the official word, right? Like, there's something that exists in the wilderness. So what is like, how do we take a discussion like this where we can get some good ideas and some thoughts of people locally? How do we then translate that into something that you are desperately looking for, this actual sanctioned message?
That's a really good question. Well, no, I'll let you, you're probably better qualified to answer than I am.
Well, perfect answer for you is, there's two committees right now. There's the technical working group, which kind of has all the people on the ground. It's a technical working group for human coexistence. That kind of informs the roundtable, which has the politicians, the mayors, those people, the decision makers sit around the table. That started back in 2018 after, I don't know how long ago, but Bear 148. A well-known bear was relocated twice and then ended up getting killed in northwestern, well, just in BC, but northwestern Alberta. And so these are points that, that we bring up at these meetings and want to talk. We have a communication subgroup right now that meets, every month or two from Banff, from Canmore, Parks Canada, Alberta Parks, myself, trying to figure out what is some consistent messaging that we can put out there. So it's great. I want to have this discussion so I can bring some of this stuff to that group and figure out what is safe, what makes sense. We don't want everyone to do one thing and then people are getting hurt all around town and being vigilantes, scaring wildlife from all over the place. But we also obviously don't want to make town a safe, fun, happy place for wildlife, because it doesn't end well for them and it could end very poorly for a person, for public safety risks. So yeah, let's talk about it. There are avenues, there are groups that I can bring this information to try and get some of that messaging developed.
I end up struggling in it just because I think some, not all, there's a whole lot of problems in some of this, but there's actions, as I said, that we can do. Letting a bear be comfortable on your front lawn because it's cool is the wrong answer. That I can tell you. That's obvious. But everybody does that. And our messaging as wildlife ambassadors tells you to do that, which is even harder. And so our wilderness is like, stop, walk, talk away, get away, right? It doesn't say get off my lawn, right? So I think there's some things that we can do if we just kind of think about it. And one of them is not let wildlife be comfortable eating the grass in front of blondies. I just don't think that's gonna end well in the long term. It'll either get hit by cars or you'll end up, that's a guy and he's trying to get the girls right now. And guess what? He's got big pointy things on his head. And you get too close and that's not gonna end well. And will it take an elk chasing somebody? The cougar that was caught on camera taking down some rabbits, the feral rabbits in the days we had lots of feral rabbits, right at the pedestrian underpass. Another one of those, what are you gonna do? Right? I think there's some obvious things to not let these things be comfortable in town and not having attractants that make the problem twice as bad when they do get here. I think that's why we focus right now on attractant management, is to reduce, if they're gonna be here anyway, don't give them a reason to stay, is the key message out of attractants. How can we not let them be comfortable? That's the question you get. The challenge with the messaging is how do you not let them be comfortable safely for you and for everybody around you? Everybody, I don't think there's any disagreement that nobody wants you to let a bear be comfortable sleeping in your tree.
Just curious if there's any studies around the benefits of foresting around communities and better forestry management. As far as I can see, the town's surrounded by dense forests. There's a bit of fire smart. There's a ribbon around town where every other tree's been felled. And I walk around Harvey Heights in summer and there's nice berry bushes right outside the hamlet. You go further in the forest, there's no berry bushes, and then inside the hamlet you've got nice grass and all these other attractants. It almost seems like our management of forest is completely the antithesis of what actually the wildlife needs, which is good habitat away from the communities, to just keep it there. And you could argue that with the bears, the elk, all of the animals.
I know that there is certainly a discussion around, Fire Smart has a very specific focus, but you could tweak it a little bit and make it a good focus too for other reasons, including making it good for wildlife. And whether or not we're there yet, I'm gonna tell you categorically no, but at least we're thinking about it. And when I say we, I'm talking not me, because that's not my job. But I know the people who are, and that's their job, and they are. And I'm not well enough educated on it to tell you what will happen next, but you raise a very good point. Having a better habitat away from town makes them go, oh, I come in, your grass is okay, but there's better grass over here. And that's actually the problem with golf courses personally.
Just add on to that, and it's a great comment, but, so I'm with the Biosphere Institute too, we had a right this talk here, we talked about wildfires, and, one of the very interesting pieces is the notion of making a community more wildfire safe, while at the same time also making, the places where they're being treated, whatever it is, that are wildfire. And properly done, that would be, make that safer, and, it has the potential to keep the bears, and another wildlife out of town, because we're creating killer habitat, there's really good habitat, actually habitat in areas where they want to be, and we don't have them anymore. So that's it's a work in progress. It's a great conversation, and it relies on the province of Alberta doing a great job on that front. And if that doesn't happen, then the place talks that, hey, let's create a community forest, where we have some managed ownership and management of the wild areas that surround our so which we haven't seen in Alberta, but it's not to say it can happen things, but it's a conversation on this topic.
And just to add to that, I totally agree with you, I think that'd be great, but then the extra piece to that is, we make beautiful habitat for wildlife. But guess who goes in there all the time? People, lots of recreation, people with off-leash dogs, so that along with, you know, different trail design, people management, maybe temporal closures, times of day, that would be a must to go along with that, to make that space suitable and enticing for wildlife. Because right now, for an elk, town is where it's at. Safe, no predators, lots of green grass, no one bothering you. The elk here have learned, hey, if I have a baby and I act aggressive to these people, they stay away, they get scared, they put up this beautiful yellow tape around me. Everyone stays away, I get peace and quiet. This is amazing, I'm never leaving here. And we've allowed that to happen as people.
That's exactly, I would argue, that's exactly why that little brown bear was hiding in my hamlet for 2 weeks. Believed it was safe, period. Was taught by mom it was safe, everybody's let it be safe.
I would like to leave tonight with something to do for when we have a bear. I call it in, and then the bear comes back the next day.
Call it in again.
After, we call it in every day. Does our neighbor call it in? Like, this is one thing that we're not sure of.
Yeah, I'm gonna summarize with some takeaways that I would recommend. There is no official messaging. You're gonna hear what I think based on my experience dealing with bears in my hamlet, and I'm gonna give you some takeaways of what you can do, because we are not powerless in this. It's the question is, how do we do it safely considering our neighbors? We have to really be considerate of our neighbors.
If I summarize this for me, it's, and I will say this for myself, but I would hope we would all get to this if we're not there. To take responsibility for the reality that we have come into what was wildlife territory. And that we have to be responsible to the well-being of our neighbors, the wildlife. And we need to get clear, how do we do that? So we respect them.
I can't agree with you anymore. Our whole goal as wildlife ambassadors is to teach you to be respectful in the wilderness to the fact that it's their house. And the fact that it's my house doesn't mean if somebody you don't want in your house, it doesn't mean you treat them disrespectfully. It means you make sure that they're not there and move them out. And that's basically the messaging we're trying to, I think is the right messaging. And that whole argument I hear a lot, by the way, as a wildlife ambassador, is the wildlife were here first, therefore they should be here. And I'm just gonna tell you that from my perspective, that doesn't end well. I've got lots of examples. I don't know how many bears we removed from town this year. What was it, Nick?
There's for sure 4 were euthanized, 2 were relocated. this fall.
It does not end well. If you want bears on the landscape, letting them be in your town is not the way to do it. Period. It sounds like a great idea that they were here first, so we'll just let them be here, but it doesn't
That's
end
not
well.
what I'm saying, that's not what I'm saying, is that we now live here, we call this home. We need to take responsibility for how do we respect them so they stay alive. That's what we want for ourselves, we need to want that for them.
Absolutely.
It's 8 o'clock. We're gonna continue our conversation. I just want to wrap up and answer your question. Being here comes with wonder and amazement, but it also comes with responsibility. And this is what you're talking about. It comes with the fact that we need to be respectful of all sorts of things, including our neighbors, the animals. So what would I say are takeaways? We live with wildlife, they could be anywhere, but you know, maybe they shouldn't be. Maybe having a herd of deer downtown, a herd of elk downtown, bears in Paintbox Lodge is not a good thing. So they can be anywhere, but they shouldn't be. Encounters that we have with them can be magical, but can have unintended consequences. When we do run across them, if we do nothing, we say, what you're doing is okay. And inaction matters just as much as action. So they have come with that responsibility that you were talking about. Report all sightings, please. Bears are not moved or actioned just because you call. There were many points along the last 3 months where the duo could have been discouraged, but because we didn't, relocation was the outcome. The relocation wasn't the outcome because we called. That's not how it works. There's a lot of people who believe that. It's not how it works. Call in sightings, it's the record of what goes on. I get that, as I mentioned, I get the internal bear report. I know what's on it. I know that people look at that information, they act on it. Attention from the experts and the folks that are better than me leads to warnings and actions and good stuff. So please report that stuff. Yeah, they're overworked, but I understand that, and they do too. They're not in the business of trying to kill wildlife. They're in the business of trying to keep it on the landscape too. But you have to help. Every action we take or don't take makes a difference. We can't stop bears from coming in, but we can give them bad experiences when they're here. I love the idea of air horns on your front lawn, bear. That's a discouragement. It's a pretty safe one. Ideally, it'd be really great if they got bear spray, but I really don't want you to do that, to be honest. Don't be chasing bears around, but if you, realistically speaking, I think there's a bunch more bears that would be more alive if they actually had a snub full of bear spray. That's just my guess. But an air horn is a great concept. Irritating them. Nick was saying he was at a talk last night in Cochrane where one of the Fish and Wildlife officers was talking about cans full of rocks and shaking them and making a pile of noise. Give bears and cougars and deer no reason to stay. Hard with elk because they're eating your front yard grass, but attractant's bad. I can't stress this enough. Attractant's bad. That's a reason to stay. We got the bear bomb today. I'd love to have the cougar one. The cougar one talks about how you should fence off underneath your porches so that there is no way that they could make a space underneath there. Make it so that they don't want to be there. Like, what's the point of being here? Other places are nicer. Make them uncomfortable so they don't want to stay. The only question is, and this is why I'm convinced there's no messaging, is the question is how to do that safely. It's okay to push it off my yard, but it becomes a problem in the next person's yard. A couple of years ago, over Christmas, I think, we were all in, this happened in a whole lot of reaction in my hamlet because somebody had a bear, or it wasn't Christmas, it was late fall. Somebody had a bear and they fired off a whole lot of bear bangers and it sounded like fireworks going off in my hamlet. And like a lot of them, like a half a dozen or more. And everybody was like, what's going on? Who's letting up? So that becomes the unintended consequences. I love air horns because that's a sound that is audible a long way away. And it's better than putting it on Facebook that there's a bear in my yard because you can hear it. Make sure that the expert managers are informed. They are experts around here. They really are. And they're really good because I've worked with them and I know how good they are. But they can't help you until you tell them. So tell them. So that's my suggestions on what you can do. I want to say thanks to Nick and my fox that was on my front yard. He actually showed up again last week. He's kind of runs around. It's kind of fun. I love these guys in my neighborhood. He's a nocturnal guy, comes in, eats my mice, and believe me, I have mice. So yeah, some guys are kind of fun to have in your environment, as long as he doesn't get the cat that likes to walk across the lawn. Anyway, thank you very much to Nick. I also want to acknowledge some folks that are in the room. I'm not going to name them by name, but there's a bunch of my Bear Team folks with me here tonight. Well, I'm really glad that they're here. They taught me a lot of this stuff, and they're great at what they do. They're awesome at what they do. Let them help you. Thank you.
We can take some more questions if you want, but I mean, you're welcome to leave as well. The presentation's over. You're also welcome to stay if you have a question that you don't want to ask in front of the room. We're welcome to, we're happy to answer some questions here. Were there any other questions online?
No, I think just some messages of gratitude. So yeah, thanks, Derek. Someone said, thanks for great educational class. So glad you folks are trying to figure out solutions and we'll be successful soon.
That's my fervent hope.
Yeah.
Folks, I'll just, as a little advertorial for the next group talk on Wednesday, January 15th, in this room, we'll have Dr. Hillary Young from the Yellowstone Yukon Conservation Initiative to talk about our wildlife corridors, the good, the bad, and the future. Related topic.
Okay,
Was there a question over there? I saw.
just one clarification there. You're saying that regardless of where we see wildlife, Kananaskis Dispatch is the place to call. Don't call the town, they won't do anything, even if they're in town.
If you pass it to Kananaskis Dispatch is the guys that distribute the information, and they distribute it to the right people, and they do it on a timely basis. And the only thing I would add is if you're in Banff Park, don't call Banff Dispatch, call Banff Dispatch. That's the only dividing line that matters in this particular circumstance. But yeah, you call dispatch. That's what they're there for. They're really good at it. They're really nice people. They're never going to give you a hard time for calling. They're super guys, and they're really good at what they do.
And they will dispatch Fish and Wildlife or conservation officers,
Yeah.
whoever's jurisdiction it is, they will dispatch the appropriate group.
And they put up with me on the radio, which means they're really good people.
We typically had some pretty quick responses. So we live on second right beside Millennium Park. So when we do see the bears, which happens every fall, we do get a pretty good response. I will say there hasn't been the greatest consistency on the responses of what we're to do. Some have told us to, oh, would you go outside and scare the bear away? Other ones have said, don't go in and interact. We haven't had consistent responses.
Yep,
Exactly.
I think that's because there's no official message.
Yeah.
They're as much trapped by the protocols and stuff as we are. It's like without an official message, it's tough. That's why I'm giving you my opinion tonight. It is not an official message. There is none.
Yeah, we know.
Yeah. And the way I equate when I teach wildlife safety workshops, we talk about people want to get in the nitty-gritty of defensive versus non-defensive encounters, and playing dead versus fighting back and all this stuff, and do this or do that if it's a black bear or grizzly bear. There's all this stuff out there. Half the people can't even tell the difference between a grizzly and a black bear. So none of that stuff really works. But the beauty of bear spray, I always say, it takes the guesswork out of it. It doesn't matter why the bears attack you or approaching, use your bear spray, period. And the same with kind of this messaging is take it one step further with, I get it, we need to know how to deal with wildlife, but why is the wildlife hanging out is the more important thing. Is there a fruit tree? Is there a garbage? Bears aren't just gonna hang out in town for no reason. We're annoying. People are annoying. And so they're gonna do it for a reason. Look what just happened in the fall, the boss. The most famous bear in Banff got into crabapple trees. And because it's in Banff, the response time was like 8 seconds for Parks Canada to get there. If it would have been hours, things may have gone a different way. But that bear was moved out of town ASAP to try and protect that bear. Those trees got removed right away. But that bear came back because it knew, oh, those crab apples, those were yummy. There's a lot of calories right there. So once again, in addition to how to handle those encounters. We all collectively need to get rid of the reasons that those bears are here in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, those tickets have really hacked off a lot of our neighbors, but there's a lot less bears around now. There's a lot less trees.
Yeah.
And if you go to the little bear that decided to try and take naps because mom abandoned it, that bear isn't looking for food, that bear is looking for shelter and safety. And irritating the heck out of it means that it hasn't got it. So by definition, it doesn't want to stay. It's the equivalent of moving an attractant. My attractant is safety. So I've removed that attractant. And so that kind of stuff works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, Town of Canmore Municipal Enforcement has been cracking down over the last year and a bit, for sure, both with education and with handing out fines. You know, if bears have been seen in trees or bears have been relocated from those property owners are getting fined. Absolutely. And one step in addition to that, if you remember from last fall, there was a mother with 3 cubs that was relocated 200 kilometers away. Within 2 weeks, they came back, 1 cub less. We don't know what happened to that cub, but then they got into a commercial dumpster and were euthanized. So since then, municipal enforcement's also been cracking down on commercial businesses, making sure that their bins are bear proof, making sure grease traps are secured and wildlife proof. So we're all trying to work together. We're trying to keep it moving to try and get that, because yes, education is key, but you have to have enforcement as well, because not everyone is going to do the right thing without that extra nudge.
And also what to do about people who won't put their dog on a leash. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
So there you go, and that just goes, and even if you throw all, in my opinion, if you throw all the wildlife issues and everything to the side and just talk about being a good neighbor, what is right for other people, what is fair for other people, you know, and it's, you're not entitled to have your dog off leash wherever you go as a dog. You know, dogs don't vote, dogs don't have a say, neither do wildlife. When we're sitting at the table, I don't see a grizzly bear when we're having discussions about what we should be doing about grizzly bears. They don't get to say it. We as people are in charge of managing that. And so, yes, I can safely say on behalf of the wildlife ambassadors, the most frustrating and difficult thing to handle are off-leash dogs. And there's still a lot of people, but it's almost all locals that do it. It's not the visitors. When I go to a place and I'm new, I look at the signs, I read the signs. You know, I was in Costa Rica, there's signs everywhere about things, and I follow the rules, and most visitors do the same. It's the locals that don't do it. In my opinion, in my experience. I'll speak from my own point of view.
At some point, it'd be really helpful for me and maybe other people to have some guidance, education on how to communicate with off-leash dog owners in areas that should not be off-leash. I'm not a confrontational person, and I decided to gently speak with a new neighbor who said, I can't remember his language, I don't even want to remember it, but mind your own business, he said. My dog's well trained, it doesn't go after elk, and I thought.
Yeah.
So I'm minded my own business and not spoken with him again.
The first thing I can suggest is come be a wildlife ambassador and you learn how.
Yeah.
Okay.
The second thing and the more important lesson is even the wildlife ambassadors, I've been doing this for 13 years. We don't have, if you come in with an expectation, you're gonna convince everybody you talk to, you get very frustrated very fast. There's a whole pile of people who just aren't gonna listen to you. If we can change behavior on a handful, that's great. 50% to 70% is the best I can do. And I've been told nasty things to my face about having your dog off me. And that person's not gonna change. That's the carrot stick problem. That person is not gonna respond to an interpersonal conversation on a peer-to-peer basis with any kind of data. Sorry, they're gonna need a ticket. And even when they get tickets, there's repeat offenders. So, yeah, but come be a wildlife ambassador. Come join us. Hey, we're recruiting.
You get this really cool.
You get a really cool vest, which is somewhat akin, and the best part is it's like heated vest. It feels like a heated vest because it's just insulated or something like that. The thing is like wearing a plastic bag.
Are you recruiting or is there?
Ask him. He's the
We typically, if recruitment happens, it's normally in February, March, and that time of year. It's dependent on numbers, on funding, a few different things, the need, the request. Right now, we have about 29 active, I'd say 27 more so active volunteers in the program. But there's a there's a kind of a tipping point on the numbers and, you know, for I see how many people are coming back next year. Typically, we don't really lose a lot of people. People, once they're in, they want to stay. But, both on the website, their report, our social media, Facebook, you know, if there is recruitment happening, I will typically announce it on the radio as well and potentially even the newspapers. Stay tuned. I don't want to say a for sure yes or a for sure no, but likely, you know, it happens every February, March.
This guy's been doing it
Sometimes we
13
get
years, it's a lot.
pizza.
Yeah, the guy's been doing it for a long, 13 years, it's a lot of fun. Challenging and interesting
For
conversation.
those who want to, let me just add that, in a couple of weeks, the town council will vote on the next budget. And in there right now, subject to change, but right now there's $30,000 per year over the next 5 years. The town of Cameron has spent getting their own house in order and leading by example, cutting down some of the many fruit trees on their own property. Which is a great thing, and I think that it's commendable, and you see, number of people should talk to their council more. It's just a thing, and just give them a shout out, give this concept a shout out and say, you know, hope that living skills in the books and is remains in the budget, which is fantastic. So we can accelerate the removal of the practice. Yeah.
Practice bad. A bit of a broken record, I'd say. Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you. That was very.